Hey everyone, and welcome to Private Podcast, where we plug in and explore the intersection of privacy, human rights, technology, and democracy. I'm your host, Derek E. Silva. Today we're speaking with Tim Beiko. Tim leads the group of Ethereum core developers to upgrade the blockchain network in the most significant overhaul since it went live in 2015. We're going to talk about his journey into blockchain, what led him to join Consensus, before trailblazing the implementation of EIP 1559 last year. And now over to the conversation with Tim Beiko. Hey everyone, like I said off the top, we are here with Tim Beiko, a core Ethereum Foundation team member who's doing some really important work. Tim, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Terrific. Let's start off like we typically do with a little bit about your background and how you ended up in blockchain technology in general.
Right. So I first heard about Bitcoin from a friend in 2014, and it was someone who was always into these weird schemes. And at the time, his two schemes were one was buying physical Iraqi dinars off eBay because the price had plummeted after, I guess, 9/11, and and you actually couldn't trade them on the FX markets. So
Oh,
his scheme was to like buy pounds of them, keep them in his room, and hope that they would go up. And then the other thing he was doing was Bitcoin at the time, and Bitcoin seemed much simpler. So I bought a Bitcoin.
there's something you
Then
don't
in
hear very often.
2014, yeah, and that kind of got me, start to pay attention to the space. And it was very, ad hoc for the first few years. And in 2016, the DAO happened on Ethereum, the project. And so that was super interesting to me, that they were trying to build this kind of decentralized VC fund on Ethereum. So that got me to dive deeper. I bought some Ether, contributed to the DAO, and like a month later, lost my money in the hack. Had to figure out how to like split my coins and not get them stolen on Ethereum Classic.
Yeah.
And really kind of was forced down the rabbit hole then. Um, and after the DAO, though, for like a good 6 months period, it kind of felt like Ethereum would maybe just like not come back from this. Like it was such a bad thing. Um, and so I didn't pay as much attention. But then late 2016, early 2017, you started to see more projects kind of start building on Ethereum again. And that's when, yeah, I started to dive a little bit more into the space. And by like mid 2017, when there was really kind of this ICO craze, it was pretty clear to me that like there would always be demand for Ethereum, or at least like for the foreseeable future. But I had very low confidence in like any of the specific projects being built on the network at the time.
Sure.
My general thinking was like, maybe all of these fail, but something else will like be built on Ethereum after. And it was also clear at that time how like fragile the actual network was. Like it, transaction pools would be like stuck for days because of spam from an ICO. It just felt like very I don't know, like, yeah, very fragile relative to like the importance of what was happening on it. And that kind of got me interested in learning more about the actual protocol itself. Um, so I spent some time. I just got deep into Ethereum. At the time, I was working a different job. I was a product manager, so it was kind of hard to find a product manager job on the protocol. So it took me a while. But in 2018, Consensus started putting together a protocol team, and needed product managers for that. So I ended up there working as a product manager on their Ethereum mainnet client, called Besu today. It was called the Pantheon at the time.
All right. Cool. That's a really interesting journey. If you don't mind sharing, what was your initial, or maybe after a little bit of time, like how did you feel about the rollback on Ethereum that eventually led to this splinter of Ethereum Classic versus Ethereum? Like, were you for it the entire time of like, yeah, we all need to get our money back, or did you have any sort of hesitation around that, like the Ethereum
Yeah.
Classic community clearly did, of like, no, it happened, we need to leave it in place and just move forward?
To be honest, like I don't think I understood enough at the point to like really grasp the implications. Yeah, like yeah, I don't have a great answer. Like I think I think the thing that was interesting is like, one, it like never occurred to me, and to be fair to a lot of the community at that point as well, that the Ethereum Classic chain would be revived, right? Like it was clear to me that this was like a contentious thing. I don't think I had like a strong say either way. But then the fact that Ethereum Classic kind of showed up a couple of weeks after, I think that was like a big surprise element. Um, and yeah, to be honest, at that point, it was more like panic because I was scared, because they didn't have like replay protection. So I was
Right.
like, man, I hope I just don't lose all my coins through this. And I had no idea. You had to like literally, send your coins to like a smart contract so it would like change the nonce on each side. But I had no idea what any of that was back then. So it was just like clicking random buttons and hoping that you don't lose all your money in one step of the way. But yeah, and I think it was just interesting to see like the fact that this was possible, to be honest. Yeah, I didn't have a strong say in either side. It was kind of clear. I definitely felt like the part of Ethereum I was interested, like the community was like the Ethereum ETH side.
Yeah.
Um, but the fact that like this other side that had like a legitimate disagreement could like spin up and exist felt like really exciting. Like it's not really something you see like say in, I was like working in tech before. Like you don't see that in a startup, right? Like
No,
a third of startup employees go and they take the code base and they launch their version of the app.
and it's legal.
Um, so yeah, it was just yeah, exactly, right? Yeah. So yeah, it was mostly just like fascination that this was even possible.
Yeah, I mean, like theoretically that could happen in a typical startup, but you'd get sued out of existence.
Right. Yeah. And but yeah, and you wouldn't you wouldn't get like the chain continuing, like which you wouldn't get like the users, you wouldn't get like it's like all this stuff that just kind of stays across both chains is we really take it for granted now, but like it's wild when you think about it relative to just other like technology constructs.
Yeah. I'll have to go. I mean, obviously, I know Ethereum Classic exists. I know how it came to be. I haven't looked into any stats recently to see if like are the transactions actually full, like, or the blocks are they
Yeah.
are they actually full of transactions or not? I'm gonna have to go do a little bit of research after this
Yeah.
just to see what's going on. But ETC persists. Like you can buy it and sell it, and
Yeah.
but I don't know that it has a very robust ecosystem at this point. 4 years later. So you talked about joining Consensus. What about that flip from Consensus to the Ethereum Foundation? How did that come up?
Right. So at Consensus, like I said, I was the product manager on our mainnet client,
Yeah,
and so that means I would attend basically the AllCoreDevs calls, which are the calls in Ethereum where the different client developers get together and discuss potential changes to the protocol, just share technical updates and whatnot. And at the time, Hudson Jameson was leading those. So I did that for 2.5 years, and I was like, aside from Hudson, the only non-engineer on the call, right? Like, because the call is like basically engineers and researchers, and like Hudson was like the facilitator, and I think I was the only product manager because like none of the other teams have that. Like, Guess doesn't have a product manager.
right.
Um, so um, so over time I just started helping Hudson do random things, like set up agendas or like fill in if he wanted to take a vacation,
Yeah,
stuff like that. Um, and um, and yeah, Hudson had been doing this I think since 2016. So I think in like 2021, he was starting to think like he might want to move on to do something else, and just take a break from like the craziness that it is. Um, and 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 yeah, at the same time, I mean, I love working on the protocol. It's really what excites me the most. But yeah, it kind of felt like for me, it's like instead of working with just Besu, I would get to work, with all the different teams. And Consensus is like a great place. I really enjoyed my time there, but like it's still like a company, and the Ethereum Foundation is not. So I guess the closest analogy I could put, it's almost like being like tenured at a university or something, where like obviously like I have a job and people have expectations, but like the autonomy that I have is bigger than like any company, even though Consensus is a pretty self-organizing place. So yeah, it just makes sense. And We both took the time, so I think it happened over like roughly a 6 months period where like Hudson like slowly stepped away from some stuff at the EF, and I started working. I was basically working at both places for a while. I made sure that we hired somebody to replace me on the Besu team, and then slowly transitioned. I think one thing like the EF really tries to be mindful of is like not poaching talent from the ecosystem. Like generally, you know, it's better if like there's different organizations flourishing on Ethereum. We don't want to like suck everything in. So yeah, we just made sure to take the time that like consensus would not be like negatively affected by me leaving, and that also for Hudson, stepping away from this, that like it was pretty clear to the community that like I would slowly take over. And I think yeah, around like March of last year, yeah, it was basically me full time.
Yeah, Hudson seems like a really nice guy. I've seen him on
Yeah,
various calls and at some virtual events last year because everything was virtual.
yeah.
Um, Seemed like a super nice guy, and so do you. So I think I imagine that was a pretty easy transition between the two of you. And yeah, I know he's been involved in some other things more recently. So hopefully that transition has been great for him. And I mean, you're getting quite a bit of notoriety. You have a really good reputation, so it seems like it's gone well for you too.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I mean, if obviously it's like you have to want to do this type of work, but like if you do, like I mean, it's great. Like I get to work with all these researchers, these client developers, solve like the biggest problem on Ethereum. I mean, they solve it, but like be there when they solve the biggest problems on Ethereum,
Yeah.
um, and and then like yeah, I get to like talk to people about what we're doing and kind of explain that to the broader community.
So for I know some product managers. I've managed my own products because purely out of necessity. But can you shed a little bit of light on like what your day to day actually looks like? Like what does it mean to be a product manager at the Ethereum Foundation, leading
Right.
EIPs and more recently the Ethereum 2.0 merge and transition?
Right. So first of all, I'm not like my title is not product manager. We're terrible at titles at the Ethereum Foundation, but I think
Okay.
I see myself much more as like a coordinator than like a PM. And I think that the reason is like a typical PM, you like talk to users, set the roadmap, write documents, and like try the stuff, whatever, give feedback and use a product and whatnot. I think
Yeah.
this is like a bit more like I don't choose what gets to go in Ethereum, right? There's a lot of different people who have a lot of different opinions about what you do it. And I think like I do my job best if I'm able to like synthesize those different things, bring the people together to have discussions, and ideally like pinpoint what are like the points of like contention or like technical disagreements so that we spend our time actually focused on that and not like discussing some other random thing that that is maybe beside the point. Um, so my day is I always feel a bit bad saying that, but it's very reactive in a way. And I think this is the thing also where it goes against like being a good product manager. It's like the thing you want to do as a product manager is like be proactive and like set the stuff in advance. So like, your team always knows what's coming. And my day is more like I wake up, I check, messages across a bunch of places. I try to see if there's like anything that's like critical, like, is there an emergency? If so, then like that's my day. Whatever needs to happen to get that done. Um, if not, I usually just try to like get back to people to make sure that like no one is like blocked on me. And there's like a bunch of random things. Like it can be something like, like we want to discuss this thing on AllCoreDevs and like, making sure it's on the agenda and that like it's clearly explained, or I don't know, we're trying to hire somebody at the EF to help with something, or we have like a bounty for something and somebody's like sending a submission. So I just get like, this type of inbound. I try to like prioritize getting through it so that people can kind of move on. Um, then usually I have like some meetings in the morning. It really depends. And then on a good day, I have like the afternoon to do like deep work, whether that's like writing something, diving into an EIP,
Yeah.
something like that. Um, and and yeah, that's like a average day. It's like if I can get through like all of the inbound, then have a couple meetings and then do a session of work, and then practice. There's like way more inbound that happens throughout the day that you're just kind of keeping up with.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I remember meeting some product managers at Microsoft, in a past life, pretty much, like working at an IT research firm way back in the day. And I mean, they had some inbound, but yeah, they definitely spent a lot more time like actually thinking about features and how to document those so that developers could implement them in the way they thought, which is not really part of your role now as at the
Right.
Ethereum Foundation. You're
Yeah,
doing.
and the thing is like how it happens, like people write those features. Like we're in a spot where like there's way more things that people want to see on Ethereum than we have bandwidth to like ship.
Yeah,
So a lot of my time is spent like, and also I don't make that call, right? Like I think that's the thing, when you're a product manager, you do have like the authority to make the call about like, hey, these are the 5 things we could do. Here are like the 3 we're gonna do, and we're gonna do this one first.
right.
Like my role now is not to make that decision, it's to like help people make that decision. And I think, yeah, the way to do that is I need to know about all those features and like to understand them so that I can kind of see, these are the bits where like it might be problematic, and making sure that like we address that, um and we're aware of it early. Yeah.
Yeah. So, relatively speaking, I guess you famously helped coordinate the implementation of EIP 1559 last year, which had a pretty significant impact on how transactions were broadcast to the chain. I guess would be the best way to put
Yeah.
that. Pretty much everybody building on Ethereum had to make a change to their smart contract or to the wallet application, the interface and all that, or not the interface, but to the wallet, on how to submit those transactions to make sure everything was using this new format of basically two different fees, right? One like normal transaction fee and then a priority fee, which went straight to miners, I believe, or goes straight to miners.
Yeah.
But that was really an interim thing that was leading to, or an interim item that was leading to this much larger change, moving from proof of work and using the power of Norway or whatever comparison is being used at the time to proof of stake, which is much more energy efficient. I know a lot of people are hoping for faster, cheaper. Vitalik seems to be saying that that's not a guarantee, which is fine. But where are we at with Ethereum 2.0 right now in that transition? My understanding is you and everybody else involved just unleashed a major milestone on that towards that transition.
Right. Yeah, yeah. So lots to unpack here. So I think at a high level,
Take your time.
yeah, the next big thing we want to do is move Ethereum from using, as you said, proof of work mining to using proof of stake. And in case people aren't aware, Ethereum has had a proof of stake chain live since over a year now,
Yeah.
called the Beacon chain. And there's I don't know the exact number, but tens of billions of dollars being secured. And basically, what that chain does today is it runs the entire proof of stake algorithm, but it comes to consensus on blocks which don't contain end user transactions. So it's like there is some data in those blocks, but it's like, think of it as like consensus metadata about the proof of stake algorithm. So like who voted for what, are there new deposits, are there people leaving, are there invalid votes, all that thing. But there's no like transactions like a Uniswap trade, for example. And the reason for that is like when proof of stake launched, Ethereum was already like a massive network with tons of usage, and we wanted to be sure that like if there was an issue, it wouldn't affect the applications on Ethereum. And so that's why we launched it in parallel, and we kind of kept proof of work for the main application chain because it had worked since the start of Ethereum. But basically, in spring of last year, we got pretty confident that like, hey, we're ready to use this thing as our main driver for the consensus of the network. And in the past year, there had been a lot of research done, and one like really interesting insight that had come was that the current Ethereum clients on the proof of work network, like Besu, Geth, Nethermind, or Aragon, they don't just work with proof of work. So you can run them with other consensus algorithms. And like on Ethereum, for example, we have different test nets which run proof of authority, and people can run like private networks running their own custom consensus algorithm. So there's already this concept in like the client code bases of like switching a consensus algorithm.
Right.
Um, so one insight was like, well, why don't we just switch the consensus mechanism from proof of work to proof of stake, and have like the current Ethereum clients, like the software that we know is like securely running the network, simply keep doing what it does, executing transactions, but instead of using like the proof of work to figure out which block is valid, it would just rely on the beacon chain to tell it. So we had a hackathon last May, so May 2021, to work on this, and we basically managed to prototype kind of a post-merge network where you had the proof of stake chain like dictating the head of the network, but then the transactions within the blocks were actually executed by what we now call the execution layer, but the current proof of work clients.
Yeah.
So that kind of proved us like this can work, which is very encouraging. And obviously we found a ton of bugs, ton of issues. So we spent the summer fixing those. And then in the fall, we got everybody together and we spent a week kind of doing another hacking session where we managed to get a network, started off proof of work, running through a full transition to proof of stake, and like finalizing on the other side.
Nice.
And so that kind of showed us like not only does the end state work, but there is a way to make this transition. And again, found a bunch of bugs, of issues, spent some time fixing them. And then basically in December of last year, right before the holidays, we launched the first public testnet called Kintsugi. And there we basically expected the spec to be mostly correct. We thought we might find some issues in it, but we thought it would be mostly stable. So we opened it up to the public to also get some early testing from like applications. And that's kind of what happened, where we did find some kind of edge case issues in the spec if the network was like in a state of chaos and like unfinality. And we managed to get like some preliminary data that like applications would still work as we expected them to. And so earlier this week, we launched a second testnet called Kiln, and the idea there is like we expect the spec to be basically final. We might find some specific implementation issues, like some bugs in the clients, but we wouldn't expect to find like something that where we need to re-architect the entire specification.
Right.
And this also actually happened. So we found a few issues between like some clients, like Geth and Prism had like an encoding issue, sending some data between each other. So we are finding like those types of issues, but we hope that like we don't find something where like we need to change the architecture or the specification.
Right.
That would be very unfortunate at this point. And in parallel, what we also want is we want applications to like try this. Like we want to make sure that like we know the smart contracts themselves will work. Like I think we're very high confidence there, but we want to make sure that like the entire developer flow works. Like for example, if you have like your GitHub running your CI, which like auto deploys your contracts and like your front end, like we want to make sure like that stuff works, and we don't expect that like there's a break in something in the protocol that's broken, but like maybe there's some integration somewhere that stops working, and like now's the time where we'd like to fix those. And so that's where we are today. Like fixing client implementations, making sure that tooling supports kind of like this post-merge network. Once that's settled, the next step would be to fork the existing public testnets on Ethereum, like we do every time. So
Okay.
those give us more data points that things are good. And then once those are forked and are stable, then we would upgrade mainnet. Yeah.
Cool. So like taking Rigby, Gorley, or Garley, those ones over
Yeah.
to what is going to be
Yeah.
Ethereum
Proof of
2.0,
stake.
and yeah, and
Yeah.
cool, good stuff.
Yeah.
I heard about the rebrand a little while ago with the consensus layer and the execution layer. What do
Right.
you did you have any
What is that?
input
Yeah.
there, or like
Yeah.
I get it, but
Right.
I'm wondering whether there was actually a lot of confusion from people that necessitated that.
So I think yeah, the thing with Ethereum 2.0 is it was like this umbrella term which defined like a bunch of different upgrades, like proof of stake and sharding mostly.
Okay.
And the thing is like and it also implied some sort of sequentiality where like in practice we're actually working on all these things quite in quite parallel tracks. and so we decided to change things. Oh, and the other thing it implied, sorry, is like a separate token, right? And I think that's where there's probably the most confusion.
Yeah.
And so yeah, right. So I think the going from that, like the two main things we want to convey is like one, when we move from proof of work to proof of stake, like the ether on on the beacon chain, the ether on like the current proof of work chain is like the same thing. Like there's no ETH1 versus ETH2 token. And also like you're not gonna get like, it's not like a Bitcoin to Bitcoin Cash style fork where like you get a new token.
Yeah.
And I think there's like an extremely high risk of like scams popping up and trying to do that. So hopefully, we can, like, we've tried to communicate that that's not the case. And I think the terminology of saying, look, the beacon chain is like the consensus layer of the network. It's literally what it does. It helps come to consensus about
Right.
which block is valid and which one isn't. And then the current proof of work chain, we remove the proof of work part. What's left is the execution layer where you actually have the EVM running, which takes in transactions, applies them against the latest Ethereum states, and makes
Yeah.
sure that those are valid, or reports if they're invalid, right? And so I think, yeah, it helps to just like separate those two things, and kind of call them what they are. Because also in the future, we talk a lot about like, like sharding and scalability. If we have like a separate like data shard network, maybe that's like the data layer or like the shard layer or whatever. But I think it's just, I agree it is confusing now, and like it's like a transition, and like half the places on the internet still use Ethereum 2.0, but we're trying to move in a direction where like, yeah, ideally we can just like clearly specify what each component does, and highlight that like there's no like separation, like it's all kind of the same Ethereum network. Yeah.
I mean, ultimately, if people can figure out Avalanche X chain, P chain, and C chain, which definitely took me a few hours to figure out, like,
Yeah.
why are there three? What the hell's going on? Um, I'm
Yeah.
confident that they can figure out execution layer, data layer, consensus layer, etc. So,
Yeah.
like to that
Yeah.
extent, like, is the execution layer actually getting any sort of upgrade or modification? Like I said earlier, people have been expecting, rightly or wrongly, that execution layer would be faster and therefore potentially less expensive.
Right.
Vitalik Buterin, Ethereum co-founder, has been out there saying like, hold your horses. That might not happen. Like,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
are the people you talk to expecting
Yeah.
any sort of difference, I
Right.
guess,
Right.
after the
Yeah.
transition is complete?
Yeah. So to be clear, the transition to proof of stake does not change the capacity of the chain, right?
Okay.
Like, so it doesn't give us cheaper or more transactions.
Okay.
The only thing that it does is it really changes how we decide which head of the chain is valid.
Right.
And and there's like, implications there, like obviously on the security of the chain. There's implications on the environmental impact, like we touched on. There's implications on like issuance.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's it is just that change. It has a bunch of like, call them second order effects, but it does not affect how like Ethereum scales. And at a high level, part of why we separated these things is because we can kind of pursue scaling in parallel. And so the main way we think about Ethereum scaling today is through layer two rollups. So rollups, for people not familiar, you can think of them as like mini Ethereum networks that are running in parallel, but that use either game theoretical or cryptographic guarantees to give you the same level of security that you would have as if you were running on the main Ethereum network, and always allow you to withdraw your funds on the main Ethereum network if something goes wrong. Where like your funds are never like stuck in the rollup, uh, even if the organization or organizations operating the rollups are offline. And so these rollups exist today, right? Like, Arbitrum, Optimism,
Yeah.
ZK Sync, Starkware. They're deployed, and they're getting more and more adoption. Um, and that said, we do have a ton of like things we want to do to make them even cheaper. Um, and they all kind of revolved around this idea that, um, rollups rollups generate a lot of data and only make a small amount of computation on the Ethereum network. Um, and the Ethereum network charges way more for computation than it charges for data storage. So rollups are kind of a good scaling solution because you can just basically execute all the transactions that are happening, post their data on the network, pay a bit less money than if you would actually execute them, and only have to like run transactions every so often when you suspect that there's fraud or something. So what we want to do is, because these rollups generate a ton of data, is find ways where we can reduce the cost of storing data on Ethereum. And we basically have three approaches there. The first is just like straight up reduce the cost. So, there is a cost that's set today. We could reduce it. I think there's always like a trade-off. Like when you reduce those costs, it becomes more expensive to run a node because there's more data over time that accumulates on the network. So I think we could reduce it a little, but like it's not going to give us like a 10 or 100x increase in scale. So the second kind of big idea we have is this idea of like a data network where we allow a much greater amount of data to go on the network, but we don't guarantee it past kind of a medium length amount of time. So
Right.
think
I've heard
like
about this.
weeks to maybe months.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so what this gives you is like it gives you an increased data throughput. It gives anybody who might want to keep a copy for themselves, like again, a reasonable amount of time to save a copy. But a year from now, the network is not like forced to store that data, and we don't require every user to store it. And so that's like generally the approach we're taking about scaling Ethereum. And then of that like data network approach, there's like two things you can do. One is you either build this full like separate data layer, which is a bit more complex because you need to gossip the data amongst it. You basically need to build a whole new like peer-to-peer network. The other solution we're looking at right now a lot is creating a new type of transaction on Ethereum, like we did with EIP 1559, that just has literally, we call it like a data blob attached to it. So it's like a transaction which has like a bit more data. You can think of it like almost like a fat transaction, but similarly to the data network idea, we only guarantee that data is available for like a medium amount of time. So this would basically allow us to get like a lot of the benefits from a whole data network, but without most of the engineering costs, because we can have it be a little bit less data and keep our current kind of gossip networks on Ethereum because we're using like this transaction format. So that's roughly the approach we're going for. I think we do want, right after this upgrade to proof of stake, we want to ship something which reduces the layer 2 fees. I think depending on how complicated this approach with kind of the transactions with extra data is, that's what we'd prefer to do. If it does turn out to be too complicated, I think there's a world where we decide that like we first just straight up lower the current price to give us like some relief, and after that end up doing the sharded data transactions.
This potential shortening of data guarantees, I guess, comes up with Vitalik again, talking about how the graph might be a good long-term solution for people who do want to capture all the data and have it indexed and searchable, right? You can
Right.
query it at any point in time. Not, I imagine he doesn't want to pick winners, but obviously that's one significant example of a decentralized network where that's available, right? Like and it's fully on Ethereum's.
Right.
They're trying to move everybody who's already on Ethereum over to the decentralized network now, and then all these other networks that they already support.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think we definitely like don't want to build. We want to build the specification in a way that it's agnostic to like the data providers.
Right.
And I agree. Like it's great. We want to have
Yeah. It could
we
be,
want to have multiple different ones. Like
yeah, it could be
yeah,
parsec,
like it could be
covalent,
obviously the graph.
like,
It can be it.
yeah.
Yeah, 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 and it can be Infura. It can be, but we want to build it in a way where like ideally it's all of them, not just one. I think that would be a failure. That like if we end up relying, and I have nothing against the graph or against Infura specifically, but like I don't want to be relying on any single one of those, whichever it is.
Sure.
We want to build it in a way that's general, where sure, like yeah, there are going to be some providers who make a business of like basically storing old data and then probably giving it to you on demand if you need it for whatever reason, and charging you for that API call. Um, yeah, so that's reasonable, but we just want to make sure that yeah, it's we're not cementing the graph or Infura or anybody else as like the sole provider of that data.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are already companies making money out of that. Like Parsec is a centralized platform. They're collecting all the data. Dune Analytics does something similar. So like, yeah, that already exists. But I
Yeah,
I get where you're coming from. I guess potentially, maybe I should be on the next core call. Um, Potentially building a spec for the data side of things. So like you could have a data blob, as you mentioned, made me think of JSON blobs, but you could have a data blob, and therefore you could choose to store that on Arweave or IPFS or another actual storage protocol. Is
right.
that something that
Yeah.
you guys have talked about at all, or is that even doable?
So again, like it would be totally doable, and there are specs for the data formats
Okay.
today. I think I forget the EIP number, but if it's called shard blob transactions. I think it's 48, 44. If you look in like the 40s, and something with shard and transaction in it,
Yeah.
it'll be there. So there's a spec in there for like what it would look like. And yeah, you can absolutely store that on Airweave or IPFS. And the thing is, it's also worth noting, like, we're talking about like storing all the data, but the thing that's also
All
possible is
right.
like, say I use Optimism and I just want to store my subset, or like, I don't even use Optimism, whatever. Like I just post random data on chain because I like it.
Yeah.
And I want to store that. Like I, you also want it to be possible for somebody like me to just select a subset and keep a copy of that.
Right.
Um, and again, there'll probably be some services that show up to like offer that experience, in like an abstracted way. But yeah, you also want it to be possible to store like partial bits of the data and make those accessible.
Cool. So you were participating part-time, or actually you were participating on behalf of Consensus for a little while there in these core protocol meetings at that level, and then eventually made this transition. Like, in your experience so far as a PM or coordinator, what do you think have been your biggest challenges so far?
It's a hard question. I think I mean one thing that's like extremely hard, like timelines are always hard, but like, you know, like I expected the IP 1559 first probably to be out by like the end of the year, and then it went out in like August of the next year.
Yeah.
So like, and I think we actually did a good job. It's just like there's so many unknown unknowns that like it's hard to predict. Um, I don't know if that's the biggest challenge though, because like I always kind of know they're gonna be wrong. Like it's just weird. It's like mentally you have this timeline, and then uh, you're also okay if it's like gonna be wrong. I think yeah, that's one. I think the other one also is like trying to figure out like what's what's like the crux of 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 the trade-off when we're discussing different things. Like I think this is like, to me, this is what I see as like the biggest risk if like we spend 3 months on some things and it turns out to be worthless. The thing I like really ask myself is like, is there a way we could have spotted that thing 3 months ago, right? Like and had this conversation and like save ourselves down. So I, it's not like it's not a challenge in that like it's one thing that like was hard and I overcame it, but I think it's the one thing where like I I tried to set like a high bar for myself because I'm like, this is how I can affect the protocol. Like I don't write code, I don't like, you know, produce like the actual
Yeah.
output. But I'm like, man, if I miss this thing and like this guy brought it up 3 months ago and nobody listened to him, and like I was there, and then 3 months later we're discussing the thing he brought up, we like wasted those 3 months.
Right.
That drives me really frustrated. So I try to avoid that.
Now that's a real product manager talking. Um,
Yeah.
what We're coming up to time, but I think we can squeeze in a few like rapid fire questions here. What are some of the
Sure.
milestones that you're really proud of hitting in 2021, and maybe beyond the Ethereum proof of stake transition? I'm not going to say 2.0. The proof of stake transition. What do you hope to
Yeah.
achieve in 2022? ignoring all the fake
Right.
timelines that people have put together.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think that so 1559 was big in 2021, but to me that's like yeah, that was huge. I think two other things that were really great. One is this workshop we had with client developers to get like this prototype of the entire process done.
Right.
Um, I it was hard, like technically it was challenging, but also logistically. I mean, we were kind of in the wave, like after the Delta COVID wave before Omicron, we got like that sweet spot where like we actually didn't have to cancel, but like planning all that through COVID and like actually having it work, I think that was
So
incredible.
that was in person
Um,
then.
I think another thing that like yeah, that was in person, and it was like the first time in 2 years that we got like different client developers in person.
Yeah.
So that was, the fact that it happened and the fact that it was successful, I think was really cool. I think the other thing, and I don't want to take the full credit for this, but like I mentioned, I took over Hudson's role, and Hudson was really like a team of one at the EF, and he got like a bit of help from here to there, but like mostly a team of one. We do have like a few more people now that work alongside me, which are owning like different parts of kind of dealing with the protocol that we didn't. So we have Trent who does like community outreach and is more like basically focused on the applications building on Ethereum. How do we better get their feedback? How do we like make sure that we're taking their view into account? And I think that's something that was like missing at the protocol level. And like frankly, I don't have the bandwidth. Like I was telling you before we recorded, like I barely follow what happens in DeFi. I have like a high level understanding, but like it's hard for me to like keep tabs on all this stuff. And I think Trent does like an incredible job there. We also had this other initiative that Piper from the EF run, which was a core dev apprenticeship program. So one of our big problems is we don't have enough core developers, and it's a very weird thing for people to get started in.
Yeah.
There's no like clear path, so it was like, well, let's just give a bunch of small grants to people who want to do this and like let them work on stuff they think is interested. So Piper ran that for like two cohorts, and we're trying to we got a bunch of data from it. I think it was super successful. Now we want to try and find a way to like run it in a more sustainable way where it's not just one guy doing this in his spare time, but like it's an actual thing. So I think yeah, like generally like the fact that we're able to kind of grow this sort of different places where people can join this like core protocol work.
Yeah.
Because like yeah, I think over the years it's been like a small group, and it's like very like obscure how exactly to like take part in it. So yeah, making some progress there has been really good.
Honestly, I don't think that's something unique to the Ethereum Foundation. I think that happens across the board. It could be whether it's an offshoot like
Yeah,
Phantom or Polygon or Avalanche, or even more traditionally operating system development. Like, who gets
yeah,
up in the morning is like, I'm
yeah,
gonna make a new OS. Like, those sorts of people are few and far
right,
between.
yeah,
Linux has been
yeah,
going forever, but with a fairly small core group of people who contribute the vast majority of the
yeah,
code, or IBM and Red
yeah,
Hat literally just paying people to contribute to the core kernel and
yeah,
stuff like that. Like, it definitely, it's a unique type of person, very special type of person, and I think we undervalue at the end of the day a lot of the work they do. Like, the people working on Mac OS or Windows, at the very core level to make sure that everything actually works at the end of the day. Always see your apps. I love my app. I love this new thing. It's like, yeah, but without all the other stuff, underneath, like, you're doing nothing. Or like bytecode work for CPUs, like, BIOSes, like,
yeah,
nobody thinks about that stuff. And yet it's literally the very foundation, we're doing any of this stuff on. So, yeah, good luck. I mean, it sounds like you guys have made some progress there at least. And no, I mean, sincerely,
yeah,
like, like, I hope that works out well, and I hope you find a really sustainable way
yeah,
to do it, because it's literally the work that makes everything else on Ethereum possible. Like, without a core
yeah,
protocol, without EIPs in place, ERCs coming through, like, we'd have, the same chain we had 5 years ago, and that's no fun. Like, we're
yeah.
we're in a much better place now, for what Ethereum and all of its forks are capable of.
Yeah.
Um, two final
Yeah.
questions here, and then I think we'll let you go. If somebody
Of course.
comes to you and says, "Well," and actually, I'll give a little bit of a story here. My brother-in-law came to me a little while ago, and he's a software developer, and he's like, "Oh man, I just realized there's more than one blockchain." And he's a very smart person who works on like core uh, 5G networking gear for a major manufacturer. So computer science type guy, like he knows what he's talking about, but wrapping his head around blockchain tech took him a little while, and that's
Yeah.
fine. It takes everybody, a little bit to really get their hands on it. But um, just because of the way media portrays it, it's the blockchain. It's always about the
Yeah.
blockchain. Oh, but somebody deployed something on the blockchain. Man, there's like dozens, right? That may almost maybe around 100 at this point. Many dead, but regardless. So you probably encounter this every once in a while. So when somebody asks you, "What's the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum?" Do you have something you like to say, or how would you
Right.
explain the difference?
So it depends who they are, right? Like, say they are a software engineer. I think the one thing that software engineers actually, I had this in a conversation recently. They're like, why do you call everything a transaction on a blockchain, right? Like, isn't it like an operation? And they're right. And so I think if you're a software engineer, I think starting from Bitcoin, saying like, look, this is like a tiny virtual machine that only, to keep it simple, only executes transfers between addresses. And I know there's more
Yeah,
stuff you can do on Bitcoin, but yeah, keeping it simple.
by itself, I
So
think that's about it.
right, you're right. So like, but it's like a virtual machine which maintains a set of coins and their owners, and you can apply like a state transition on it, which sends coins from like address A to address B, and then you through like a consensus mechanism, you come to consensus on like who owns what in the network, and you get like agreement over all the nodes about that. And there's a bunch of rabbit holes you can explore there. But a big difference with Ethereum is it's the same high level concept, and we still call it a transaction because it's built from Bitcoin. But the virtual machine in the middle is a bit more flexible. So we're not only maintaining a list of like coins and their owners, we're maintaining basically a state of coins and their owners, but also programs with associated code and data storage. And any transaction you send on Ethereum can basically run an operation against this virtual machine and modify any of this. So yes, you can send coins from one person to another, but you can also create a new program, store your program's code, add data to it, or interact with an existing program. And I think at a high level, that's how I would put it if they were a software engineer. And then they probably have a ton of questions about like every single one of those components, and we'd dive down there. Yeah.
And then you'd say, "You should go talk to this guy
Yeah.
because I'm not a
Yeah.
developer." Final question. Who do you think Satoshi Nakamoto is or potentially was?
So I don't have a strong idea, but I heard a good joke about this, and so I'll just use that. And the joke I heard was
Sure.
that it was Vitalik when he was like 10 years old, but he didn't think anybody would take him seriously if he posted with his real name, so he just did a pseudonym. Um, so yeah, that'll be my guess. Not
Okay.
serious about it, but yeah, I don't have a great a great clue there.
I will say, I think the best argument I've heard so far is that it was Hal Finney, based on transaction history, knowledge, etc. And the time by the time Hal passed away, like what had happened on chain with the addresses people knew he owned and all that. And I was
Yeah,
like, okay, yeah, that's a pretty convincing story. So I don't know if it
yeah,
is. I have literally
yeah.
no idea. People think I've been in
I think
in,
it's
in
yeah.
blockchain for much longer than I have, and it's but I think it's a
I
good theory, and I think it's the
It feels
strongest that
too
I've heard.
easy though. Yeah, that's my like I get why he could be, and I'm not like an expert in this, and like I haven't reviewed all like this stuff myself, but from what I get, it's like I feel like if he was, he would have maybe done a better job, and at like not making it clear that he was, but
Oh,
the
okay.
counter argument to that is like you wouldn't expect Bitcoin to become what it was. Although even that is not clear. the counter argument is like you wouldn't expect Bitcoin to become as big, but Hal Finney was actually like I think one of the first people who like got it and like had this idea like if Bitcoin represented this percent of the world's value, it would be worth
Right.
I don't know what the amount was, but like huge. And so it does feel like very early on he like got the scale, and if that was true and he knew that from the beginning, then like I would expect, given how good he was around everything else, that it wouldn't be so clear that it was Satoshi. Um, but like,
But
or
would it
maybe that's
matter?
just actually, yeah. No, I don't have a strong opinion there. I don't think it does. Um, I think the only thing that would, if he was alive or she was alive and they moved the coins, like that would obviously change things. But I think,
Sure.
yeah, as long as the coins don't move, I and I don't think you could realistically claim to be Satoshi without like either moving the coins or signing something from that. And I
Yeah,
think,
Craig.
yeah, whoever would do that, it would be incredibly value destructive for Bitcoin. So I don't see like a world where like it happens. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, that's been my whole thing with Craig Wright. Like, just you say you can prove it, prove it. But anyway, Tim, thanks so much. We've gone overtime, so really appreciate you spending a couple extra minutes there at the end answering that question. For anybody who wants to keep up with the coordinating you're doing, where should they go to do that?
Twitter's probably the best place at TIMBIKO. So first and last together. If you don't want to keep up with all of my tweets and you just want to know what's happening on Ethereum, blog.ethereum.org will share kind of the highlights. So, when there's a network upgrade, that's where it gets posted. Yeah, but if you want a bit more of like a day-to-day update, Twitter's probably the best place.
Terrific. Yeah. Good luck with the Kiln testnet. Hopefully everything works out really well, and you guys can move. Well, I guess Rinkeby, Garrily, etc. The test nets, and then if that all goes well, over to mainnet. Looking forward to it.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks everybody for listening or watching, and until next time, stay free.